There we go. I am Lady Rain, and this is Reader's Nook. We are going to get right into it. I am excited. And I've heard that this book does a lot more explanation, a lot more gibberish is what he called it. He really did. But for me, I like the explanation. I like to know the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, and the surroundings, what the person's doing, how they're feeling. So I kind of like this. So, shall we get going? Chapter 2, Part 4. Back at the house, she showered and changed, using one of her maxi pads even though the heavy menstrual flow already appeared to be lessening. Then she fixed herself a huge supper of canned baked beans and knockwurst. Ooh, that sounds good. But she found herself too tired to do much more than pick at it. She put the remains, more than half, down for Peter and went over to her rocker by the window. The thesis she had been reading was still on the floor beside the chair, her place marked with a torn-off matchbook cover. Her notepad was beside it. She picked it up, turned to a fresh page, and began to sketch the thing in the woods, as she had seen it when she took that last look back. She was no great shakes with a pen unless it was words she was making. She had some small sketching talent. This sketch went very slowly, however, not just because she wanted it to be as exact as she could make it, but because she was so tired. To make matters worse, Peter came over and nuzzled her hand, wanting to be patted. She stroked Peter's head absently, erasing the jag his nose had put onto the horizon line of her sketch. Yeah, you're a good dog, a great dog. Go check the mail, why don't you? Peter trotted across the living room and nosed the screen door open. Anderson went back to work on her sketch, glancing up once to see Peter do his world-famous canine mail retrieval trick. He put his left paw up on the mailbox post and then began to swipe at the door of the box. Joe Paulson, the postman, knew about Peter and always left it ajar. He got the door down, then lost his balance before he could hook the mail out with his paw. Anderson winced a little. Until this year, Peter had never lost his balance. Getting the mail had been his piece de la resistance. Better than playing dead Viet Cong, and much better than anything mundane like sitting up or speaking for a dog biscuit. It wowed everyone she saw do it. Peter knew it. But these days it was a painful ritual to watch. It made Anderson feel the way she imagined she would feel if she saw Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers as they were now, trying to do one of their old dance routines. The dog managed to get up on the post again, and this time Peter hooked the mail, a catalog and a letter, or a bill, yes, with the end of the month coming. It was more likely a bill. Out of the box with his first swipe of his paw. It fluttered to the road, and as Peter picked it up, Anderson dropped her eyes back to her sketch, telling herself to stop banging the goddamn funeral bell for Peter every 2 minutes. The dog actually looked half alive tonight. There had been nights recently when he'd had to totter up on his hind legs 3 or 4 times before he was able to get his mail, which usually came to no more than a free sample of Procter & Gamble or an advertising circular from Kmart. Anderson stared at her sketch closely, absently shading in the trunk of the big pine tree with the split top. It wasn't 100% accurate, but it was pretty close. She'd gotten the angle of the thing right, anyway. She drew a box around it, then turned the box into a cube, as if to isolate the thing. The curve was obvious enough in her sketch, but had it really been there? Yes. And what was she calling a piece of metal? Was it really a hull? It was really a hull, wasn't it? A glassy, smooth, oh, goodness gracious. A rivetless hull. You're losing your mind, Bobbi. You know that, don't you? Peter scratched at the screen to be let in. Anderson went to the door, still looking at her sketch. Peter came in and dropped the mail on the chair in the hallway. Then he walked slowly down to the kitchen, presumably to see if there was anything he had overlooked on Anderson's plate. Anderson picked up the 2 pieces of mail and wiped them on the leg of her jeans with a little grimace of disgust. It was a good trick, granted, but dog spit on the mail was never going to be one of her favorite things. The catalog was from Radio Shack. They wanted to sell her a word processor. The bill was from Central Maine Power. That made her think briefly of Jim Gardner again. She tossed both on the table in the hall, went back to her chair, sat down again, flipped to a fresh page, and quickly copied her original sketch. She frowned at the mild arc, which was probably a bit of extrapolation, as if she had dug down maybe 12 or 14 feet instead of just 4. Well, so what? A little explanation didn't bother her. Hell, that was part of a fiction writer's business. And people who thought it belonged solely to science fiction or fantasy writers had never looked through the other end of the telescope, had never been faced with the problem of filling in white spaces with no history could provide. Things like what happened to the people who had colonized Roanoke Island off of the North Carolina coast, and then simply disappeared, for example, leaving no mark but the inexplicable word Croatoan carved on a tree, or the Easter Island monoliths, or why the citizens of a little town in Utah called Blessing had all suddenly gone crazy, or so it seemed, on the same day in the summer of 1884. If you didn't know for sure, it was okay to imagine, unless you found out different. There was a formula by which circumference could be determined from the arc. She was quite sure of it. She had forgotten what the damn thing was. That was the only problem. Hey! No! Why are you chewing on that? Excuse me 1 second. That is not yours to chew on. Down. This is not your cat. You do not get to chew on it. Now you can look at me just like that. I'm telling you right now, if you chew on it, you'll lose your teeth. You'll just rip them right out. Go. Are you going to come up and listen? Okay, you can come listen while I read. Don't smack me in the mouth. Can't read if you smack me in the mouth. Goofball. She had forgotten what the damn thing was called. That was the only problem. But she could maybe get a rough idea, always assuming her impression of just how much the thing's edge curved was accurate, by estimating the thing's center point. Bobbi went back to the hall table and opened its middle drawer, which was a sort of cat call. We all call them junk drawers up here. She rooted past untidy bundles of canceled checks, dead CD and 9-volt batteries. For some reason, she had never been able to shit can old batteries. What you do with old? What you do with old batteries was throw them in a drawer. God knew why. It was just the battery graveyard instead of one the elephants were supposed to have. Bunches of rubber bands and wide red canning rubbers, unanswered fan letters. She could no more throw out an unanswered fan letter than a dead battery, and recipes jolted on file cards. At the very bottom of the drawer was a litter of small tools, and among them she found what she was looking for, a compass with a yellow stub of pencil sleeved into the armature. Sitting in the rocker again, Anderson turned to a fresh sheet and drew the leading edge of the thing in the earth for the third time. She tried to keep it in scale and drew it a little bigger this time, not bothering with the surrounding trees and only suggesting the trench of this for the sake of perspective. Okay, guesswork, she said, and dug the point of compass into the yellow legal pad below the curved edge. She adjusted the compass's arc so it traced that edge fairly accurately, and then swept the compass around in a complete circle. She looked at it, then wiped her mouth with the heel of her hand. Her lips suddenly felt too loose and too wet. Bullshit, she whispered. But it wasn't bullshit, unless her estimate of the edge's curvature and of midpoint were both wildly off the beam. She had unearthed the edge of an object that was at least 300 yards in circumference. Anderson dropped the compass and the pad on the floor and looked out the window. Her heart was beating too hard. Part 5. As the sun went down, Anderson sat on her back porch, staring across her garden toward the woods, and listened to the voices in her head. In her junior year at college, she had taken a psychology department seminar on creativity. She had been amazed and a little relieved to discover that she was not concealing some private neurosis. Almost all imaginative people heard voices. Not just thoughts, but actual voices in their heads. Different persona, each as clearly defined as voices on an old-time radio show. They came from the right side of the brain, the teacher explained. The side which is most commonly associated with visions and telepathy. And that striking human ability to create images by drawing comparisons and making metaphors. There's no such thing as flying saucers. Oh, yeah. Who says so? The Air Force, for one. They closed the books on flying saucers 20 years ago. They were able to explain all but 3% of all verified sightings. And they said those last 3 were almost certainly caused by ephemeral atmospheric conditions. Stuff like sundogs, clear air turbulence, pockets of clear air electricity. Hell, the Lubbock lights were front page news. And all they turned out to be was, well, there were these travel packs of moths. These traveling packs of moths, see. And the Lubbock street lights hit their wings and reflected big, light-colored moving shapes onto the low cloud masses that a stagnant weather pattern kept over the town for a week. Most of the country spent that week thinking someone dressed like Michael Rennie in The Day the Earth Stood Still, going to come walking up Lubbock's main drag with his pet robot Gort clanging along beside him, demanding to be taken to our leader. But they were moths. You like that? Don't you have to like it? This voice was so clear it was amusing. It was that of Dr. Klingerman, who had taught the seminar. It lectured her with good old Klingy's unfailing, but rather shrill enthusiasm. Anderson smiled and lit a cigarette. Smoking a little too much tonight. The damn things were going stale anyway. In 1947, an Air Force captain named Mantle flew too high while he was chasing a flying saucer. What he thought was a flying saucer. He blacked out. His plane crashed. Mantle was killed. He died chasing a reflection of Venus on a high scud of clouds. Sundog, in other words. So there are reflections of moths, reflections of Venus, and probably reflections of a golden eye as well, Bobbi, but there are no flying saucers. Then what is that in the ground? The voice of the lecturer fell still. Oh, I forgot to realize anybody that doesn't normally come is not reading. Sorry about that. The voice of the lecturer fell still. It didn't know. So in its place came Annie's voice, telling her for the 3rd time that she was getting funny in the head, getting weird like Uncle Frank, saying they'd be measuring her for one of those canvas coats you wear backwards soon. They'd cart her up to the asylum in Bangor, or the one in Juniper Hill. She could rave about flying saucers in the woods while she wove baskets. It was Sissy's voice, all right. She could hear her on the phone right now. Tell her what had happened and get that scripture by chapter and verse. She knew it. Was it right? No, it wasn't. Annie would equate her sister's mostly solitary life with madness, no matter what Bobbi did or said. And yes, the idea that the thing in the earth was some sort of spaceship certainly was mad. But was playing with the possibility, at least until it was disproven, mad? Annie would think so, but Anderson did not. Nothing wrong with keeping an open mind. Yet the speed with which the possibility had occurred to her. She got up and went inside. Last time she had fooled with the thing in the woods, she had slept for 12 hours. She wondered if she could expect a similar sleep marathon this time. She felt almost tired enough to sleep 12 hours, God knew. Leave it alone, Bobbi. It's dangerous. But she wouldn't, she thought, pulling off her Opus for President t-shirt. Not just yet. The trouble with living alone, she had discovered, and the reason why most people she knew didn't like to be alone even for a little while, was that the longer you lived alone, the louder those voices on the right side of your brain got, and the yardsticks of rationality began to shrink in the silence. Those voices did not just request attention, they demanded it. It was so easy to become frightened of them, to think they meant madness after all. Annie sure would think they did, Bobbi thought. Climbing into bed. The lamp cast a clean and comforting circle of light, a counterpane, but she left the thesis she had been reading on the floor. She kept expecting the cramps that usually accompanied her occasionally early and heavy menstrual flow, but so far they hadn't come. Not that she was anxious for them to put in an appearance, you should understand. She crossed her hands behind her head and looked at the ceiling. No, you're not crazy at all, Bobbi, she thought. You think guards getting wiggy, but you're perfectly all right. Isn't that also a sign that you're wobbling? There's even a name for it. Denial and substitution. I'm all right. It's the world that's crazy. All true. But she still felt firmly in control of herself, and sure of one thing. She was saner in Haven than she had been in Cleves Mills, and much saner than she had been in Utica. A few more years in Utica, a few more years around Sissy, and she would have been as mad as a hatter. Anderson believed Annie actually saw driving her close relatives crazy as part of her job. No, nothing so mundane. Part of her sacred mission in life. She knew what was really troubling her. It wasn't the speed with which the possibility had occurred. It was the feeling of certainty. She would keep an open mind. The struggle would be to keep it open in favor of what Annie would call sanity. Because she knew what she had found, and it filled her with fear and awe and a restless, moving excitement. See, Annie, old Bobbi didn't move up to Stickville and go crazy. Old Bobbi moved up there and went sane. Sanity is limiting possibilities. Annie, can you dig it? Insanity is refusing to go down certain paths, speculation, even though the logic is there, like a token of the turnstile. See what I mean? No, of course you don't. You don't, and you never did. Then go away, Anne. Stay in Utica. Grind your teeth in your sleep until there's nothing left of them. Make whoever is mad enough to stay within range of your voice crazy. Be my guest. But stay out of my head. The thing in the earth was a ship from space. There, it was out. No more bullshit. Never mind, Anne. Never mind the Lubbock lights, or how the Air Force had closed its file on flying saucers. Never mind the chariots of the gods, or the Bermuda Triangle, or how Elijah was drawn up to heaven in a wheel of fire. Never mind any of it. Her heart knew what her heart knew. It was a ship. and it had either landed or crashed a long time ago, maybe millions of years ago. God. She lay in bed, hands behind her head. She was calm enough, but her heart was beating fast, fast, fast. Then another voice, and thus was the voice of her dead grandfather, repeating something Anne's voice had said earlier. Leave it alone, Bobbi. It's dangerous. A momentary vibration, her first premonition, suffocating and positive, that she had found the edge of some weird steel coffin. Peter's reaction, starting her period early, only spotting here at the farm, but bleeding like a stuck pig. She was close to it, losing track of time, sleeping the clock all the way around. And don't forget old Chuck the woodchuck. Chuck had smelly gas and decomposed. There were no flies. No flies on Chuck, you might say. None of that shit adds up to Shiola. I'll buy the possibility of a ship in the earth because no matter how crazy it sounds at first, the logic's still there. But there's no logic to the rest of this stuff. They're loose beads rolling around on a table. Thread them into a string, and maybe I'll buy it. I'll think about it anyway, okay? Her grandfather's voice again, and slow, authoritative voice. That slow, authoritative voice. The only one in the house that had even been able to strike Annie silent, and silent as a kid. Those things all happened after you found it, Bobbi. That's your string. No, not enough. Easy enough to talk back to her grandfather now. The man was 16 years in his grave. It was her grandfather's voice that followed her down to sleep. Nevertheless, leave it alone, Bobbi. It's dangerous. And you know that, too. Chapter 3. Peter Sees the Light. Part 1. She thought she had seen something different about Peter, but hadn't been able to tell exactly what it was. When Anderson woke up the next morning, at a perfectly normal 9 o'clock, she saw it almost at once. She stood at the counter, pouring gravy train into Peter's old red dish. As usual, Peter came strolling in at the sound. The gravy train was fairly new. Up until this year, the deal had always been Gaines' meal in the morning, half a can of rival canned dog food at night, and everything Peter could catch in the woods in between. Then Peter had stopped eating the Gaines meal, and it had taken Anderson almost a month to catch on. Peter wasn't bored. What remained of his teeth simply couldn't manage to crunch up the nuggets anymore. Do something. I'm turning on my heater. I'm a little bit chilly. There we go. His teeth simply couldn't manage to crunch up the nuggets anymore. So now he got gravy train, the equivalent, she supposed, of an old man's poached egg for breakfast. She ran warm water over the gravy train nuggets, then stirred them with the old battered spoon she kept for the purpose. Gravy train has something on it that when you wet it, it makes a gravy. It's really good. The dogs love it. Soon the softening nuggets floated in a muddy liquid that actually did look like gravy. Either that, Anderson thought, or something out of a backed up septic tank. Here you go, she said, turning away from the sink. Peter was now in his accustomed spot on the linoleum, a polite distance away, so Anderson wouldn't trip over him when she turned around, and thumping his tail. Hope you enjoy it. Myself, I think I'd Ralph my... That is where she stopped, bent over with Peter's red dish in her right hand, her hair falling over one eye. She brushed it away. Pete? She heard herself say. Peter looked at her quizzically for a moment and then padded forward to get his morning kip. A moment later, he was slurping it up enthusiastically. Anderson straightened, looking at her dog, rather glad she could no longer see Peter's face. In her head, her grandfather's voice told her again to leave it alone. It was dangerous. Did she need any more string for her beads? There are about 1 million people in the country alone who would come running if they got wind of this kind of dangerous, Anderson thought. This kind of dangerous. God knows how many of the rest of the world. My hair won't stay out of my face. There's something. I think I got like a little piece of hair or something. I can't find it. God knows how many in the rest of the world. And is that all it does? How is it on cancer? Leaved post. Is that my husband? No. Okay. It was just a question. I had to pay attention. My son's at an appointment. I needed an answer. And why isn't this going away? Leave me alone. Get out of my face. I think I might have got it. All the strength suddenly ran out of her legs. She felt her way backward until she touched one of the kitchen chairs. She sat down and watched Peter eat. The milky cataract, which had covered his left eye, was now half gone. Part 2. I don't have the slightest idea, the vet said that afternoon. Anderson sat in the examining room's only chair while Peter sat obediently on the examining table. Anderson found herself remembering how she had dreaded the possibility of having to bring Peter to the vet's this summer. Only now, it didn't look as if Peter would have to be put down after all. But it isn't just my imagination, Anderson asked. She supposed that what she really wanted was for Dr. Etheridge to either confirm or confute that the Annie in her head. It's what you deserve, living out there alone with your smelly dog. Nope, Etheridge said. Although I can understand why you feel flummoxed. I feel a little flummoxed myself. I'm thinking flummoxed is like confused. Bewildered and perplexed. Okay, that's actually better. His cataract is in active remission. You can get down, Peter. Peter climbed down from the table, going first to Etheridge's stool, and then to the floor, and then to Anderson. Anderson put her hand on Peter's head and looked closely at Etheridge, thinking, did you see that? Not quite wanting to say it out loud. For a moment, Etheridge met her eyes, and then he looked away. I saw it, yes, but I'm not going to admit what I saw. Peter had gotten down carefully in a descent that was miles from the devil take the hindmost bounds of a puppy he had once been. But neither was it trembling, tentative, wobbly descent Peter would have made even a week ago, cocking his head unnaturally to the right so he could see where he was going, his balance so vague that his heart stopped until he was down with no bones broken. Peter came down with the conservative yet solid confidence of the elder statesman he had been 2 or 3 years ago. Some of it, Anderson supposed, was the fact that the vision in his left eye was returning. Etheridge had confirmed that with a few simple perception tests. But the eye wasn't all of it. The rest was improved body coordination. Simple as that. Crazy, but simple. And the shrinking cataract hadn't caused Peter's muzzle to return to salt and pepper from an almost solid white, had it? Anderson had noticed that in the pickup truck as they headed down to Augusta. She had almost driven off the road. How much of this was Etheridge seeing, not being prepared to admit he was seeing it? Quite a bit, Anderson guessed. A part of it was just that Etheridge wasn't Doc Daggett. Daggett had seen Peter at least twice a year during the first 10 years of Peter's life. And then there was the things that came up, like the time Peter had mixed in with the porcupine, for instance, and Daggett had removed the quills one by one, whistling the theme music from the bridge on River Kwai. As he did so, soothing the trembling year-old dog with One big, kindly hand. On another occasion, Peter had come limping home with a backside full of birdshot, a cruel present from a hunter either too stupid to look before he shot, or perhaps sadistic enough to inflict misery on a dog because he couldn't find a partridge or a pheasant to inflict it on. Yeah, I was leaning down petting Harley. She's determined to be right here. I'm telling you, I hope I get through Tommyknockers before my voice goes out. Dr. Daggett would have seen all the changes in Peter and would not have been able to deny them, even if he wished to. Dr. Daggett would have taken off his pink-rimmed glasses, polished them with his white coat, said something like, "We have to find out where he's been and what he's gotten into, Roberta. This is serious. Dogs don't just get younger, and this is what Peter appears to be doing." That would have forced Anderson to reply, "I know where he's been, and I've got a pretty good idea of what it did it." And that would have taken a lot of pressure off it, wouldn't it? But old Doc Daggett had sold the practice to Etheridge, who seemed nice enough, but who was still something of a stranger, and retired to Florida. Etheridge had seen Peter more often than Daggett had done, 4 times in it last year, as it happened, because as Peter grew older, he had grown steadily more infirm. But he still hadn't seen him as often as his predecessor. She suspected he didn't have his predecessor's clear eye perceptions or his guts. From the ward behind them, the German shepherd suddenly exploded a string of heavy barks that sounded like a string of canine curses. Other dogs picked it up. Peter's ears cocked forward, and he began to tremble under Anderson's hand. The Benjamin Button routine apparently hadn't done a thing for the beagle's equanimity. Anderson thought, once through his puppyhood storms, Peter had been so laid back he was damn near paralytic. This high-strung trembling was brand new. Etheridge was listening to the dogs with a slight frown. Now almost all of them were barking. "Thanks for seeing us on such short notice," Anderson said. She had to raise her voice to be heard. The dog in the waiting room also started to bark. The quick, nervous yappings of a very small animal, a pom or a poodle, most likely. Her voice broke momentarily. She felt a vibration under her fingertips, and her first thought, the ship, was the thing in the woods. But she knew what this vibration was. Though she had felt it very, very seldom, there was no mystery about it. This vibration was coming from Peter. Peter was growling, very low and deep in his throat. "Kind of you, but I think we ought to split. It sounds like you've got a mutiny on your hands." She meant it as a joke, but it no longer sounded like a joke. Suddenly, in the entire small complex, cinder block square that was Etheridge's waiting room and treatment room, plus the attached cinder block rectangle that was his ward and operating theater, was in an uproar. All the dogs out back were barking, and in the waiting room the pom had been joined by a couple of other dogs and a feminine wavering wail that was unmistakably feline. Mrs. Alden popped in, looking distressed. "Dr. Etheridge?" "All right," he said, sounding cross. "Excuse me, Miss Anderson." He left in a hurry, headed for the ward first. When he opened the door, the noise of the dogs seemed to double. "They're going bug shit," Anderson thought. And that was all she had time to think, because Peter almost lunged out from under her hand. The idling growl deep in his throat suddenly roughened into a snarl. Etheridge already hurrying down the ward's center corridor, dogs barking all around him, and the door swinging slowly shut on its pneumatic elbow behind him. Didn't hear, but Anderson did. And if she hadn't been lucky in her grab for Peter's collar, the beagle would have been across the room like a shot and into the ward after the doctor. The trembling and deep growl. Those hadn't been fear, she realized. They had been rage. It was inexplicable, completely unlike Peter. But That's what it had been. Peter's snarl turned into a strangled sound of yark as Anderson pulled him back by the collar. He turned his head, and in Peter's rolling, red-rimmed, bright eye, Anderson saw what she would later characterize only as fury at being turned from the course he wanted to flow. She could acknowledge the possibility that there was a flying saucer 300 yards around its outer rim, buried on her property. The possibility that some emanation or vibration from this ship had killed a woodchuck that had the bad luck to get a little too close. Killed it so completely and unpleasantly that even the fly seemingly wanted no part of it. She could deal with the anomalous menstrual period, a canine cataract in remission, even with the seeming certainty that her dog was somehow growing younger. All this, yes. But the idea that she had seen an insane hate for her, for Bobbi Anderson, in her good old dog Peter's eyes? No. Part 3. That moment was thankfully brief. The door to the ward shut, muffling the cacophony. Some of the tenseness seemed to go out of Peter. He was still trembling, but at least he sat down again. Come on, Pete. We're getting out of here, Anderson said. She was badly shaken, much more so than she would later admit to Jim Gardner. For to admit that would have perhaps led back to that furious leer of rage she had seen in Peter's good eye. She fumbled for the unfamiliar leash, which she had taken off Peter as soon as they got into the examining room. The dogs should be leashed when owners brought them in for examination was a requirement Anderson had always found annoying, until now. Almost dropping it. At last she managed to attach it to Peter's collar. She led Peter to the door of the waiting room, pushed it open with her foot. The noise was worse than ever. The yapper was indeed a Pomeranian, the property of a fat lady wearing bright yellow slacks and a yellow top. Fatso was trying to hold the Pom, telling it to be a good boy. To be a good boy, Eric. Be a good boy for Mommy. Very little save the dog's bright and somehow ratty eyes were visible between Mommy's large and flabby arms. Miss Anderson, Miss Alden began. She looked bewildered and a little frightened. A woman trying to conduct business as usual in a place that had suddenly become a madhouse. Anderson understood how she felt. The Pom spotted Peter. Anderson would later swear that was what set it off and seemed to go crazy. It certainly had no problem choosing a target. It sank its sharp teeth into one of Mommy's arms. "Cocksucker!" Mommy screamed, and dropped the Pom on the floor. Blood began to run down her arm. At the same time, Peter lunged forward, barking and snarling, fetching up at the end of the short leash, hard enough to jerk Anderson forward. Her right arm flagged out straight. With a clear eye of her writer's mind, Anderson saw exactly what was going to happen next. Peter the Beagle and Eric the Pom were going to meet in the middle of the room like David and Goliath. But the Pom had no brains, let alone a sling. Peter would tear its head off with one large chomp. This was averted by a girl of perhaps 11, who was sitting to Mommy's left. The girl had a porticary on her lap. Inside was a large black snake, its scales glowing with luxuriant good health. The little girl shot out one jean-clad leg with the unearthly reflexes of the very young and stomped on the trailing end of Eric's leash. Eric did one complete snap roll. That's funny. Pomeranian. Shoo. The little girl reeled the Pom in. She was by far the calmest person in the waiting room. What if that little fucker gave me the rabies? Mommy was screaming as she advanced across the room toward Mrs. Alden. Blood trickled between the fingers clapped to her arm. Peter's head turned toward her as she passed, and Anderson pulled him back, heading toward the door. Fuck the little sign, Mrs. Alden's cubbyhole read. it is customary to pay cash for professional services unless its arrangements have been made in advance. She wanted to get out of here and drove the speed limit all the way home and have a drink. She wanted to get out of here and drive the speed limit all the way home and have a drink. Patty, a double. On second thought, make that a triple. From her left came a long, low, virulent hissing sound. Anderson turned in that direction and saw a cat that might have stepped out of a Halloween decoration, black except for a single dab of white at the end of its tail. It had backed up as far as its carrying cage would allow. Its back was humped up, its fur stood straight up in hackles. Its green eyes, fixed unwaveringly on Peter, glowing fanatically. Its pink mouth was jotted wide, ringed with teeth. "Get your dog out, lady," the woman with the cat said in a voice cold as a cocking trigger. "Blackie don't like 'em." Anderson wanted to tell her she didn't care if Blackie farted or blew a tin whistle, but she would not think of this obscure but somehow exquisitely apt expression until later. She rarely did in hot situations. Her characters always knew exactly the right things to say, and she rarely had to deliberate over them. They came easily and naturally. This was almost never the case in real life. "Hold your water" was the best she could do, and she spoke in such a craven mutter that she doubted if Blackie's owner had the slightest idea what she had said, or maybe even that she had said anything at all. She really was pulling Peter now, using the leash to yank the dog along in a way she hated to see the dog pulled whenever she observed it being done on the street. Peter was making coughing noises in his throat, and his tongue was a saliva-dripping runner hanging askew from one side of his mouth. He stared at a boxer whose right foreleg was in a cast. A big man in a blue mechanic's overall was holding the boxer's rope leash with both hands, had, in fact, taken a double twist of the hay rope around one big grease-stained fist, and was still having trouble holding his dog, which would have killed Peter as quickly and efficiently as Peter himself could have the Pomeranian. The boxer was pulling mightily in spite of its broken leg, and Anderson had more faith in the mechanic's grip than she did the hay rope leash, which appeared to be fraying. It seemed to Anderson that she fumbled for the knob of the outer door with a free hand for 100 years. It was like having a nightmare where your hands are full and your pants start slowly and inexorably to slip down. Peter did this somehow. She turned the knob, then took one final hasty glance around the waiting room. It had become an absurd little no-man's land. Mommy was demanding first aid of Mrs. Alden, and apparently really did need some. Blood was now coursing down her arm in freshlets, spotting her yellow slacks and white institutional shoes. Blackie the cat was still hissing. Even Dr. Etheridge's gerbils were going mad in a complicated maze of plastic tubes and towers on the far shelf that made up their home. Eric the crazed Pomeranian stood at the end of his leash, barking at Peter in a strangled voice. Peter was snarling back. Anderson's eye fell on the little girl's black snake, saw that it had reared up like a cobra inside its porticary, and was also looking at Peter, its fangless mouth yawning, its narrow pink tongue shuttling into the air in stiff little jabs. Black snakes don't do that. I never saw a black snake do that in my life. Now, in something very close to real horror, Anderson fled, dragging Peter after her. Excuse me. Part 4. Peter began to calm down almost as soon as the door side shut behind them. He stopped coughing and dragging on the leash, and began to walk at Anderson's side. He glanced at her occasionally in that way that said, "I don't like this leash, and I'm never going to like it, but okay, if it's what you want." By the time they were both in the cab of the pickup, Peter was entirely his old self again. Anderson was not. Her hands were shaking, shaking so badly that she had to try 3 times before she could get the ignition key into its slot. Then she popped the clutch and stalled the engine. The Chevy pickup had a mighty jerk, and Peter tumbled off the seat onto the floor. He gave Anderson a reproachful beagle look, although all dogs are capable of reproachful looks. Only beagles seem to have mastered that long, suffering stare. "Where did you say you got your license, Bobby?" that expression seemed to ask. "Sears and Roebuck?" Then he climbed up to the seat again. Anderson was already finding it hard to believe that only 5 minutes ago Peter had been growling and snarling. A bad-tempered dog she'd never encountered before, apparently ready to bite anything that moved. And that expression, that... But her mind snapped shut on that before it could go any further. She got the engine going again and then headed out of the parking lot. And as she passed the side of the building, Augusta Veterinary Clinic, the neat sign read, she rolled her window down. A few barks and yaps. Nothing out of the ordinary. It had stopped. And that wasn't all that had stopped, she thought. Although she couldn't be completely sure, she thought her period was over too. If so, good riddance to bad rubbish, to coin a phrase. Part 5. Bobbi didn't want to wait, or couldn't, to get back before having a drink, she had promised herself. Just outside the Augusta city limits was a roadhouse that went by the charming name of the Big Lost Weekend Bar and Grill. Whopper spare ribs our specialty. The Nashville Kitty Cats this Friday and sad. Anderson pulled in between an old station wagon and a John Deere tractor with a dirty harrow on the back, with its blades kicked up. Further down was a big old Buick with a horse trailer behind. There we go. Anderson had kept away from that on purpose. "Stay," told Peter. "Stay," Anderson said, and Peter, now curled up on the seat, gave her a look as if to say, "Why would I want to go anywhere with you? So you can choke me some more with that stupid leash?" The Big Lost Weekend was dark and nearly deserted on a Wednesday afternoon. Its dance floor a cavern which glimmered faintly. The place reeked of sour beer. Always do. The bartender, counterman, strolled down and said, "Howdy, pretty lady. The chili's on special also." "I'd like Cutty Sark," Anderson said. "Double, water back." "You always drink like a man?" "Usually from a glass," Anderson said, a quip which made no sense at all. But she felt very tired and harrowed to get home. She went into the ladies' to change her pad and did slip one of the minis from her purse into the crotch of her panties as a precaution. But precaution was all it was. That was a relief. It seemed that the cardinal had flown off for another month. She returned to her stool in a better humor than she had left, and felt better still when she had gotten half the drink inside her. "Say, I sure didn't mean to offend you," the bartender said. "It gets lonely in here afternoons. When a stranger comes in, my lip gets runny." "My fault," Anderson said. "I haven't been having the best day of my life." He finished the drink and sighed. "You want another one, miss?" "Think I'd like purty lady better," Anderson thought. Shook her head. "I'll take a glass of milk, though. Otherwise, I'll have acid indigestion all afternoon." The bartender brought her a milk. Anderson sipped it, thought about what happened at the vet's. The answer was quick and simple. She didn't know. "I'll tell you what happened when you brought him in," she thought. "Not a thing." Her mind seized on this. The waiting room had been almost as crowded as when she brought Peter in as it had when she dragged him back out. Only there had been no bedlam scene the first time. The place had been quiet, animals of different types and species, many of them ancient and instinctive antagonists, do not make for a library atmosphere when brought together. But it had been normal. Now with the booze working in her, she recalled the man in the mechanic overall leading the boxer in. The boxer had looked at Peter. Peter had looked mildly back. No big deal. So drink your milk and get home and forget it. Okay, and what about the thing in the woods? Do I forget that too? Instead of an answer, her grandfather's voice came back. By the way, Bobby, what that thing's doing to you? Have you thought about that? She hadn't. Now that she had, she was tempted to order another drink, except another, even a single, would make her drunk. Did she really want to be sitting in the huge barn in the early afternoon, getting drunk alone, waiting for the inevitable someone, maybe the bartender himself, to cruise up and ask what a pretty place like this was doing around a girl like her? She left a 5 on the counter, and the bartender saluted her. On the way, on the way out, she saw a payphone. The phone book was dirty and dog-eared and smelled of used bourbon, but at least it was still there. Anderson deposited 20 cents, crooked the handset between the shoulder and ear while she hunted through the V's in the yellow pages, then called Etheridge's clinic. Mrs. Alden sounded quite composed. In the background, she could hear one dog barking. One. I didn't want you to think I stiffed you, she said, and I'll mail your leash back tomorrow. Not at all, Mrs. Anderson, she said. After all the years you've done business with us, you're the last person we'd worry about when it comes to deadbeats. As for the leash, we've got a closet full. Things seemed a little crazy there for a while. Boy, were they ever. We had to call medics for Mrs. Perkins. I didn't think it was bad. She'll she'll have needed stitches, of course, but lots of people who need stitches get to the doctor under their own power. She lowered her voice a little, offering Anderson a confidence that she probably wouldn't have offered a man. Thank God it was her own dog that had bit her. She's the sort of woman who starts shouting lawsuit at the drop of a hat. Any idea what might have caused it? No, neither does Etheridge. The heat after the rain, maybe. Dr. Etheridge said he heard of something like it once at a convention. A vet from California said that all the animals in our clinic had what she called a savage spell just before the last big earthquake out there. Let's see if that helps. There ain't even nothing there. It's just me getting a cold, I guess. Is that so? There was an earthquake in Maine last year, Miss Alden said. I hope there won't be another one. That nuclear plant at Wiscasset is too close for comfort. Just ask Gord, Bobby thought. She said thanks again and hung up. Anderson went back to the truck. Peter was sleeping. He opened his eyes when Anderson got in and closed them again. His muzzle lay on his paws. The gray on that muzzle was fading away. No question about it. No question at all. By the way, Bobby, what's that thing doing to you? Shut up, Granddad. She drove home, and after fortifying herself with a second scotch, a weak one, she went to the bathroom and stood close to the mirror, first examining her face and then running her fingers through her hair, lifting it and letting it drop. The gray was still there, all of it, that had so far come in, as far as she could tell. She never would have thought she would be glad to see gray. She was, sort of. We might get into chapter 4. We won't finish chapter 4, but the fact that it's got sections, it helps out. So I think we'll get into chapter 4 before we finish, because we've still got another hour. See what happens. Part 6. By early evening, dark clouds had begun to build up in the west, and by dark it had commenced thundering. The rains were going to return, it seemed, at least for a one-night stand. Anderson knew she couldn't get Peter outside that night to do more than the most pressing dog business. Since his puppyhood, the beagle had been utterly terrified of thunderstorms. Anderson sat in her rocker by the window, and if someone had been there, she supposed it would have looked like she was reading. But what she was really doing was grinding grimly away at the thesis, Range War and Civil War. It was as dry as dust, but she thought it was going to be extremely useful when she finally got around to the new one, which should be fairly soon now. Each time the thunder rolled, Peter edged a little closer to the rocker and Anderson. seeming to almost grin shamefacedly. Yeah, it's not gonna hurt me, I know, but I'll just get a little closer to you, okay? And if there comes a real blast, I'll just about crowd you out of that fucking rocker. What do you say? You don't mind, do you, Bobby? The storm held off until 9 o'clock, and by then Anderson was pretty sure there was going to be they were going to have a good one. What Havenites called a real geezer. She went into the kitchen, rummaged into the walk-in closet that served as her pantry, and found her Coleman gas lantern on a high shelf. Peter followed directly behind her, tail between his legs, shamefaced grin on his face. Anderson almost fell over him coming out of the closet with the lantern. Do you mind, Peter? Peter gave a little ground and then crowded up to Anderson's ankles again when thunder cannonaded cannonaded hard enough. I have not seen that. Cannonaded is what it looks like. Cannononaded. I just haven't seen that word the way that it's put, so stumbled. Cannonaded hard enough to rattle the windows. And as Anderson got back to her chair, lightning sheeted blue-white and the phone tinged. The wind began to rise, making the trees rustle and sigh. Peter sat hard by the rocker, looking up at Anderson pleadingly. Okay, she said with a sigh. Come on up, jerk. Peter didn't have to be asked twice. He sprang into Anderson's lap, getting her crotch a pretty good one with one front paw. He always seemed to wang her there or on one boob. He didn't aim. It was just one of those mysterious things, like the way elevators inevitably stopped at every floor when you were in a hurry. If there was a defense, Bobbi Anderson had yet to find it. Thunder tore across the sky. Peter crowded against her. His smell, you Dave Beagle, filled Anderson's nose. Why don't you just jump down my throat and have done with it, Pete? Pete grinned with his shame-faced grin, as if to say, I know it, don't rub it in. The wind rose, the lights began to flicker, a sure sign that Roberta Anderson and Central Main Power were about to bid each other a fond adieu, at least until 3 or 4 in the morning. Anderson laid the thesis aside and put her arm around her dog. She didn't really mind the occasional summer storm, or the winter blizzards, for that matter. She liked their big power. She liked the sight and sound of the power working on the land in its crude and blindly positive way. I love thunderstorms. When it rains, it's like, where's the thunder and the lightning at? And if it's just rain, it's boring, like today. It's rainy, but it's boring because there's no thunder and lightning. And then when it comes to snow, I hate snow, but I love the snow because I like to look at how pretty it is and I like to watch it fall. When it's white outside and it's blizzarding, it's just beautiful. I love watching tornadoes. Don't want to be in one, but I could love watching them. It's just the act of the storm itself is beautiful and amazing. She sensed insensate compassion in the workings of such storms. She could feel this one working inside her. The hair on her arms and the nape of her neck stirred, and a particularly close shot of lightning left her feeling almost galvanized with energy. She remembered an odd conversation she'd once had with Jim Gardner. Gard had a steel plate in his skull, a souvenir of a skiing accident that had almost killed him at the age of 17. Gardner had told her that once, while changing a light bulb, he'd gotten a hell of a shock by inadvertently sticking his finger into the socket. That was hardly uncommon. A peculiar part was that, for the first week, he had heard music and announcements and newscasts in his head. He told Anderson she had really believed for a while he was going crazy. On the 4th day of this, Gard had even identified the call letters of the station he was receiving, WZON, one of Bangor's 3 a.m. radio stations. He had written down the names of the 3 songs in a row and then called the station to see if they had indeed played those songs, plus ads for Sting's Polynesian Restaurant, Village Subaru, in the Bird Museum in Bar Harbor, and they had. On the 5th day, he said the signal started to fade. 2 days later, it was gone entirely. It was that damn skull plate, he had told her, rapping his fist gently on the scar boop, boop, by its left temple. Okay, fine, left temple. No doubt about it. I'm sure thousands would laugh, but in my own mind, I'm completely sure. If someone else had told her the story, Anderson would have believed she was having her leg pulled. But Jim hadn't been kidding. You looked in his eyes and you knew he wasn't. Why do you take the pillows off the couch and then just leave it there, you brat? Good God. I gotta pick him up. Just about all the mess in my living room is her. Like having a little kid. 18-month-old dog equals 2-year-old child that likes to rip everything apart. If someone else had told her that... Oh, wait. We're down. She knew he wasn't. Big storms had big power. Lightning flared in a blue sheet, giving Anderson a shutter click of what the truck, with the few drops of rain on the windshield, the short dirt driveway, the mailbox with its flag down, tucked securely against his aluminum side, the withering trees. Wow, I missed an entire sentence. Lightning flared in a blue sheet because that sentence made no sense, and I looked up and I missed an entire thing. Giving Anderson a shutter click of what she had come to think of as her neighbors did, as her dooryard. She saw the truck with the first drops of rain on its windshield, the short dirt driveway, the mailbox with its flag down and tucked securely against its aluminum side, the withering trees. Thunder exploded a bare moment later, and Peter jumped against her, whining. The lights went out. They didn't bother dimming or flickering or messing around. They went out all at once, completely. They were out with authority. I apologize for that. I didn't realize I missed a whole sentence. There was a green spot on the floor wall, on the far wall, just to the right of Uncle Frank's Welsh dresser. It bobbed up 2 inches, moved left, then right. It appeared for a moment and then came back. Oh, it disappeared for a moment, then came back. Anderson's dream recurred with all the eerie power of deja vu. She thought again of the lantern in Poe's study, but mixed in this time was another memory, the War of the Worlds, the Martian heat ray, raining green death on Hammersmith. She turned toward Peter, hearing the tendons in his neck creak like dirty door hinges, knowing what she was going to see. The light was coming from Peter's eye, his left eye. It glared with an witchy green light of St. Elmo's fire, drifting over a swamp after a still muggy day. No, not the eye. It was the cataract that was glowing. At least what remained of the cataract. It had gone back noticeably even from this morning at the vet's office. That side of Peter's face was lit with a lurid green light, making him look like a comic book monstrosity. Her first impulse was to get away from Peter, dive out the chair, and simply run. But this was Peter, after all. And Peter was scared to death already. If she deserted him, Peter would be terrified. Thunder cracked in the black. This time, both of them jumped. Then the rain came in a great, sighing, sheet-like rush. Anderson looked back at the wall across the room, again, at the green splotch bobbing and weaving there. She was reminded of times she had lain in bed as a child, using the wristwatch of her Timex to play a similar spot off the wall by moving her wrist. And by the way, what is it doing to you, Bobbi? Green sunken fire in Peter's eye, taking away the cataract, eating it. She looked again, and had to restrain herself from jerking back when Peter licked her hand. That night, Bobbi Anderson slept hardly at all. Chapter 4, The Dig, continued. And in case you guys are wondering, let me see if I can see how many. We're 40. Holy crap. It looks like we are looking at. Oh, that's the epilogue. Last chapter looks really long. And it looks like it's just 10 chapters, but some of them very long and some of them very short. Some of them are quite long. Like, this is to get to chapter 10 right here. And, like, chapter 9 is like 20 some, some are 15, some are 5. So it's kind of like, I think it was Desperation that had the separations of parts. And it kind of helps because I can get to a part and stop. I don't go halfway through the chapter and be like, okay, where do I stop? I can just read to that part and be done. So we've only got like, what did I say? Shoot, forgot what I said. Did I say 14? Yeah, 10. There's 10 and then an epilogue. So, I mean, we're on chapter 4, but it's like this long before we get to the chapters. So they're going to start getting longer. Okay. So at the beginning, we'll get through a couple, like a chapter and a half, and then we might get through half a chapter. So we'll just see how it goes. Yeah. Chapter 4, The Dig Continued. Part 1. When Anderson finally woke up, it was almost 10 a.m., and most of the lights in the place were on. Central main power had gotten its shit together again, it seemed. She walked around the place in her socks, turning off lights, and then looked out the front window. Peter was on the porch. Anderson let him in and looked closely at his eye. She could remember the terror of the night before. But in this morning's bright summer daylight, terror had been supplanted by fascination. Anyone would have been scared, she thought, seeing something like that in the dark, with the power out and the thunderstorm stomping the earth and the sky outside. Why in hell didn't Etheridge see this? But that was easy. The dials of radium watches glow in the day as well as in the dark. You just can't see the glow in bright light. She was a little surprised she had missed the green glow in Peter's eye on the previous nights, but hardly flabbergasted. After all, it had taken her a couple of days to even realize the cataract was shrinking. And yet, Etheridge had been close, hadn't he? Etheridge had been right in there with the old ophthalmoscope looking into Peter's eye. He had agreed with Anderson that the cataract was shrinking. Hadn't mentioned any glow, green or otherwise. Maybe he saw it and decided to unsee it. The way he saw Peter was looking younger and decided he didn't see that because he didn't want to see that. There was a part of her that didn't like the new vet a whole hell of a lot. She supposed it was because she had liked old Doc Daggett, so much and had made that foolish but apparently unavoidable assumption that Daggett would be around as long as she and Peter were. But it was it was a silly reason to feel hostility toward the old man's replacement. But even if Etheridge had failed or refused to see Peter's apparent age regression, that didn't change the fact that he seemed a perfectly competent vet. A cataract that glowed green. He didn't think he had ignored something like that. He would have ignored something like that, which led her to the conclusion that the green glow hadn't been there for Etheridge to see. At least, not right away. There hadn't been any big hurrah right away either, had there? Not when they came in. Not during the exam. Only when they were getting ready to go out. Had Peter's eyes started to glow then? Anderson poured gravy train into Peter's dish and stood with her left hand under the tap, waiting for the water to come in warm so she could wet it down. The wait kept her longer and longer. Her water heater was slow, bulky, sadly out of date. Anderson had been meaning to have it replaced. would certainly have to do so before cold weather. The only plumber in either Haven or the royal towns to Haven's immediate north and south was a rather unpleasant fellow named Delbert Childs, who always looked at her as if he knew exactly what she looked like with her clothes off. Not much, his eyes said. I guess I do. It'll do at a pinch. And always wanted to know if Anderson was writing any books lately. Childs liked to tell her that he could have been a damn good writer himself, but he had too much energy and not enough glue in the seat of his pants. Get me? The last time she'd been forced to call him had been when the pipes burst in the -20s cold snap weather before last. After she after he set things to rights, he had asked her if she would like to get steppin' sometime. Anderson declined politely. Childs tipped her a wink that aspired to wordly wisdom and made it almost to inform fatuity. You don't know what you're missing, sweetie, he said. I'm pretty sure I do, which is why I said no had come to her lips when she said nothing. But she said nothing, as little as she liked him. She had known she might need Childs again sometime. Why was it that the good zingers only came immediately to mind in real life when you don't dare use them? You could do something about that hot water heater, Bobby. A voice in her head spoke up, one that she couldn't identify. A stranger's voice in her head. Oh, golly, should she call the cops? But you could, the voice insisted. All you'd need to do would be. And then the water started to come in warm, tepid anyway, and she forgot about the water heater. She stirred the gravy train, then set it down and watched Peter eat. He was showing a much better bite these days. Out to check his teeth, she thought. Maybe you can go back to Gaines' meal. Penny saved is a penny earned, and the American reading public is not exactly beating a path to your door, babe. And exactly when had the uproar at the clinic started? Anderson thought about this carefully. She couldn't be completely sure, but the more she thought about it, the more it seemed to have been not for sure. It seemed that it might have been not for sure, but might have been right after Dr. Etheridge finished examining Peter's cataract and put down the ophthalmoscope. Attend, Watson, the voice of Sherlock Holmes suddenly spoke up. I'm moving my heater. Spoke up in the quick, almost urgent speech rhymes of Basil Rathbone. The eye glows. No, not the eye. The cataract glows. And Anderson does not observe it, although she should. Etheridge does not observe it, and he definitely should. May we say that the animals at the Vic Clinic do not become upset until Peter's cataract begins to glow, until, we might further theorize, the healing process has resumed, possibly, that the glow is seen only when being seen is safe. Ah, Watson, that is an assumption of frightening as it is unwarranted, because that would indicate some sort of intelligence. Anderson didn't like where this was leading and tried to choke it off with the old reliable advice, let it go. This time it worked, for a while. Hi! Thank you. Glad you came. We're reading Tommyknockers. We're in chapter 4, part 2. I can't pick up my book. Yeah, it's actually turning out very lovely now. So, getting better. Anyway, part 2. Anderson wanted to go out and dig some more. Her forebrain didn't like that idea at all. Her forebrain thought the idea sucked. Leave it alone, Bobby. It's dangerous. Right. By the way, what's it doing to you? Nothing she could see. But you couldn't see what cigarette smoke did to your lungs either. That's why people went on smoking. It could be that her liver was rotting, that the chambers of her heart were splitting silting up with cholesterol, or that she had rendered herself barren. For all she knew, her bone marrow might be producing outlaw white cells like mad right this minute. Why settle for an early period when you could have something really interesting like leukemia, Bobbi? She wanted to dig it up just the same. This urge, simple and elemental, had nothing to do with her forebrain. It came baking up from someplace deeper inside. It had all the earmarks of some physical craving, salt, or some coke, or heroin, or cigarettes, or coffee. Her forebrain supplied logic. This other part supplied an almost incoherent imperative. Dig it up, Bobbi. It's okay. Dig it. Dig on it. Dig on it. Shit. Why not dig on it a while more? You know you want to know what it is. So dig it. Dig on it till you see what it is. Dig, dig, dig. She was able to turn the voice off by conscious effort and would then realize 15 minutes later she had been listening to it again, as if to a Delphic oracle. You've got to tell somebody what you found. Who? The police? Uh-huh. No way. Or who? She was in her garden, madly weeding, a junkie in withdrawal, or anyone in authority, her mind finished. Her right brain supplied Anne's sarcastic laughter, and as she had known it would, but the laughter didn't have such a force as she had feared. Like a good many of her generation, Anderson didn't put a great deal of stock and let the authorities handle it. Her distrust in the way the authorities handled things had begun at the age of 13 in Utica. She had been sitting on the sofa in her living room with Anne on one side and her mother on the other. She had been eating a hamburger and watching the Dallas police escort Lee Harvey Oswald across the underground parking garage. There were lots of Dallas police, so many, in fact, that the TV announcer was telling the country that someone had shot Oswald before all the police. All those people in authority seemed to have the slightest inkling something had gone wrong, let alone what it was. So far as she could tell, the Dallas police had done such a good job protecting John F. Kennedy and Lee Harvey Oswald that they had been put in charge of the summer race riots 2 years later. And then the war in Vietnam. Other assignments followed, holding the oil embargo 10 years after the Kennedy assassination. The negotiations to secure the release of American hostages at the embassy in Tehran. And when it became clear that the ragheads were not going to listen to the voice of reason and authority, Jimmy Carter had sent the Dallas police in to rescue those poor fellers. After all, authorities who had handled that Kent State business with such cool-headed aplomb could surely be counted on to perform the sort of job those Mission Impossible guys did every week. Well, the old Dallas police had had a spot of tough luck on that one. But by and large, they had the situation under control. All you had to do was look at how damned orderly the world situation had become in the years since the man in the strappy t-shirt with Vitalis on his thinning hair and fried chicken grease under his fingernails had blown out a president's brains as he sat in the back seat of a Lincoln rolling down the street in a Texas cow town. I'll tell Jim Gardner when he gets back. Gardner'll know what to do, how to handle it. He'll have some ideas anyway. Anne's voice. You're going to ask a certified loony for advice? Great. He's not a loony, just a little bit weird. Yeah, arrested at the last Seabrook demonstration with a loaded .45 in his backpack. That's weird, all right. Anne, shut up. Real quick, before I forget, I'm going to add racials. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. I don't know. It's not racial slurs. It's what do you call it? Um, there's a word for it when people talk about other people. As it was said, ragheads in here. Discrimination. I can't spell. There. I will save that so we have that. And that way I don't forget. Yeah. She weeded. All that morning in the hot sun she weeded. The back of her t-shirt wet with sweat. Last year's scarecrow wearing the hat she usually put on to keep the sun off. After lunch, she had laid down to take a nap and couldn't sleep. Yes, I'm wiping my mouth because, well, I can. I get spit around the edges and it bothers me. And then, yes, I wipe my fingers on my shirt. Why? Because I'm a mom and everything goes on my shirt. That's why. After lunch, she lay down to take a nap and couldn't sleep. Everything kept going through her mind, and that stranger's voice never shut up. Dig on it, Bobbi. It's okay. Dig on it. Until at last she did dig. She did get up, grabbed the crowbar, spade, and shovel, set out for the woods. At the far end of her field, she paused. Forehead grooved in thought, and came back for her pickaxe. Peter was on the porch. He looked up briefly, but made no move to come with Anderson. Anderson was not really surprised. Part 3. So about 20 minutes later, she stood above it, looking down the forested slope to the trench she had begun in the ground, freeing what she now believed to be a very tiny section of an extraterrestrial spacecraft. Its gray hull was as solid as a wrench or a screwdriver, denying dreams and vapors and supposings it was there. The dirt she had thrown to either side, moist and black and scarlet forest secret, was now a dark brown, still damp from last night's rain. Going down the slope, her foot crunched on something that sounded like newspaper. It wasn't newspaper. It was a dead sparrow. 20 feet further down was a dead crow. Feet pointed comically skyward like a dead bird in a cartoon. Bloop, boop. It just died. Boop, boop, with her feet up. Boop. Poor things. She had reached the trench and dropped her tools on the bank. The trench was muddy. She stepped in nevertheless, her work shoes splashing in the mud. She bent down and could see smooth gray meadow going into the earth, a puddle standing on one side. What are you? She put her hand on it. That vibration sank into her skin and seemed, for a moment, to go all through her. Then it stopped. Anderson turned and put her hand on her shovel, feeling its smooth wood, slightly warmed by the sun. She was vaguely aware that she could hear no forest noises, none at all. No birds singing, no animals crashing through the undergrowth, and away from the smell of the human being. She was more sharply aware of the smells. Peaty earth, pine needles, bark and sap. A voice inside her. A very deep voice. Not coming from the right of her brain, but perhaps from the very root of her mind, screamed in terror. Something's happening, Bobbi. Something is happening right now. Get out of here. Dead Chuck, dead birds, Bobbi. Please, please, please. Her hand her hand tightened on the shovel's handle, and she saw it again, as she had sketched it, the gray leading edge of something titanic in the earth. Her period had started again, but that was all right. She had put a pad in the crotch of her panties even before she went out to weed the garden, a maxi. And there were a half dozen in her pack, weren't there? Or was it more like a dozen? She didn't know, and it didn't matter. Not even discovering some part of her had known she would end up here in spite of everything foolish, of whatever foolish conceptions of free will the rest of her mind might possess disturbed her. A shining sort of peace that filled her. Dead animals, periods that stop and start again, arriving prepared even after you had assured yourself the decision had not yet been taken. Things were small things. These were small things, smaller than small. A whole lot of bullshit sheet. She just, she would just dig for a while, dig on this sucker, see if there was anything but smooth metal skin to see. Because everything's fine, Bobbi Anderson said in an unnatural stillness, and then she began to dig. Chapter 5, Part 1. Gardner takes a fall. Part 1. While Bobbi Anderson was tracing a titanic shape with a compass and thinking the unthinkable with the brain more numbed and exhaustion than she knew, Jim Gardner was doing the only work he could these days. This time he was doing it in Boston. The poetry reading on June 25th was at BU, Boston University. That went all right. The 26th was an off day. It was also the day that Gardner stumbled. Only stumbled didn't really describe what happened, fortunately. It was no minor matter like snagging your foot under a root while you were walking in the woods. It was a fall that he took. One leg fucking fall. Like taking a no expense paid bone smasher of a tumble down a long flight of stairs. Stairs? Shit, he had almost fallen off the face of the earth. The fall started in his hotel room. It ended on the breakwater at Arcadia Beach, New Hampshire, 8 days later. Bobby wanted to dig. Guard woke up on the morning of the 26th wanting to drink. He knew there was no such thing as a partially arrested alcoholic. You were either drinking or you weren't. He wasn't drinking now, and that was good. But there had always been long periods when he didn't even think about booze. Months sometimes. They're almost sleeping the same way. This is crazy. The dogs are sleeping crazy. I gotta show you guys this. Check this out. These are my dogs. Okay. Yeah, I have a few things in the way, but this is go this way. This is Mama sleeping, okay? She got her paws up, sitting the same way, laying just like that, with her head cocked downward between the pillow and the couch. Okay? This is Phoebe. Near in the chair. Let me see where it's at. Whoop. Okay, here we go. She's sleeping in the chair. Her paws are both the same way as her mama's, and she's laying the same way, except for she's turned a little. They're both on their back. They're definitely mother-daughter. Telling you. They are a crazy pair. I had to get a picture. It was just too adorable. Ugh, lost my bookmark. It was just too adorable to like pass up. So I had to. Hope y'all don't mind. I had to show you guys my puppies. All right. Let's see. You were either drinking or you weren't. He wasn't drinking now, but that was good. And that was good. But there had always been long periods when he didn't even think about booze. Months sometimes. He would drop into a meeting once in a while. If 2 weeks went by in which Guard didn't attend an AA meeting, he felt uneasy. The way he felt if he spilled the salt and didn't toss some over his shoulder and stand up and say, "Hi, I'm Jim, and I'm an alcoholic." But when the urge was absent, he didn't feel like the truth. It didn't feel like the truth. During these periods, it wasn't exact. It what he wasn't actually dry. He could and did drink that was, as opposed to boozing. A couple of cocktails, about 5, if he was at the facility function or a facility dinner party. Oh, Pat, a couple of cocktails around 5 if he was at a faculty function or a faculty dinner party. Just that and no more. Or he could call Bobbi Anderson and ask if she'd like to come over to go out for a couple of cold ones, and it was fine, no sweat. Then there would come a morning like this, when he would wake up wanting all the booze in the world. This seemed to be an actual thirst, a physical thing. It made him think of those cartoons Virgil Parch used to do on the Saturday Evening Post. In the Saturday Evening Post. The ones where some funky old prospector I gotta get a drink. Is always crawling across the desert, his tongue hanging out, looking for a water hole. I know those cartoons. They actually do them like on Bugs Bunny and stuff. It's hilarious. All he could do when the urge came to him was fight it off, stand it off, try to earn a draw. Sometimes it was actually better to be in a place like Boston when this happened because you could go to a meeting every night. Oh, I might be on the done for it now. Every 4 hours, if that was what it took. After 3 or 4 days, it would go away, usually. He would, he thought, just wait it out. Sit in his room and watch movies on cable TV, charge them to room service. He had spent the 8 years since his divorce and severance from college teaching as a full-time poet, which meant he had come to live in an odd little sub-society where barter was usually more important than money. I gotcha. He had traded poems for food. On one occasion, a birthday sonnet for a farmer's wife in exchange for 3 shopping bags of new potatoes. Goddamn thing, better rhyme, too, farmer had said, fixing a stony eye upon Gardner. Real poems rhyme. Gardner, who could take a hint, especially when his stomach was concerned, composed a sonnet so filled with exuberant masculine rhymes that he burst into gales of laughter after scanning the second draft. He called Bobbi, read it to her, and they both howled. It was even better out loud. Out loud, it sounded like a love letter from Dr. Seuss. But he hadn't needed Bobbi to point out to him that it was still an honest piece of work, gangly, but not condescending. On another occasion, a small press in West Minot agreed to publish a book of his poems. This had been in early 1983 and was, in fact, the last book of poems Gardner had published, and offered half a cord of wood as in advance. Gardner took it. You should have held out for 3/4 of a cord, Bobbi told him that night as they sat in the front. Oh, excuse me. As they sat in front of her stove, feet up on the fender, smoking cigarettes, as a wild shrieked fresh snow across the fields. Oh my God. Cigarettes as a wind shrieked fresh snow across the fields and into the trees. They're good poems. There's a lot of them, too. I know, Gardner said. But I was cold. Half a cord'll get me until spring. He dropped her a wink. Besides, the guys from Connecticut, I don't think he knew most of it was ash. She dropped her feet to the floor and stared at him. You're kidding. You kidding? Nope. She began to giggle, and he kissed her soundly, and later took her to bed, and they slept together in spoons. He remembered waking up once, listening to the wind, thinking of all the dark and rushing cold outside, and all the warmth of his bed, filled with their peaceful heat under 2 quilts, and wishing it could be like this forever. Only nothing ever was. He had been raised to believe God was love, but you had to wonder how loving a God could be when he made men and women smart enough to land on the moon, but stupid enough to have to learn There was no such thing as forever, over and over again. The next day, Bobbi had again offered money, and Gardner again refused. He wasn't exactly rolling in dough, but he made out, and he couldn't help the little spark of anger he felt in spite of her matter-of-fact tone. "Don't you know who's supposed to get the money after a night in bed?" he asked. She stuck out her chin. "You calling me a whore?" He smiled. "You need a pimp? There's money in it, I hear. You want breakfast, guard? Or do you want to piss me off? How about both?" "No," she said, and he saw that she was really mad. Christ, he was getting worse and worse at seeing things like that. "And it used to be so easy." He hugged her. "I was only kidding. Couldn't you see that?" he thought. She always used to be able to tell when I was kidding. But of course she hadn't known he was kidding because he hadn't been. If he believed different, the only one getting kidded was himself. He had been trying to hurt her because she'd embarrassed him, and it wasn't her offer that had been stupid. It was his embarrassment. He had more or less chosen the life he was living, hadn't he? And he didn't want to hurt Bobbi, didn't want to drive Bobbi away. The bed part was fine, but the bed part wasn't the real important part. The real important part was that Bobbi Anderson was a friend, and something scary seemed to be happening just lately. How fast he seemed to be running out of friends. That was pretty scary, all right. Running out of friends, or running them out. Which is it, guard? Which is it, guard? At first, hugging her was like hugging an ironing board, and he was afraid she would try to pull away, and he would make the mistake of trying to hold on. She finally softened. "I want breakfast," he said, "and to say I'm sorry." "It's all right," she said, turning away before he could see her face, but her voice held the dry briskness that meant she was either crying or near it. "I keep forgetting it's bad manners to offer money to Yankees." Well, he didn't know if it was bad manners or not, but he would not take money from Bobbi. Never had, never would. The New England poetry. Yeah, she's in the chair. Look at her. There she goes, right down on the chair. The New England poetry caravan, however, was a different matter. "Grab that chicken, son," Ron Cummings, who needed money about as much as a pope needed a new hat, would have said. "The bitch is too slow to run and too fat to pass up." The New England poetry caravan paid cash. Coin of the realm for poetry, 200 up front and 200 at the end of the tour. The word made flesh, you might say. But hard cash, it was understood, was only part of the deal. The rest was the tab. While you were on tour, you took advantage of every opportunity. You got your meals from room service, your haircut in the hotel barbershop if there was one, brought your extra pair of shoes if you had one, and put them out one night instead of your regular shoes so you could get the extra shined up. There were the in-room movies you never got a chance to see in the theater because theaters persisted in wanting money for much the same thing poets, even the good ones, very good ones, were for some reason supposed to provide for free or next to it. 3 bags of spuds equals 1 sonnet, for instance. There was a room charge for the movies, of course, but what of that? You didn't even have to put them on the tab. Some computer did it automatically, and all Gardner had to say on the subject was, "God bless and keep the tab and bring those fuckers on." He watched everything from Emmanuel in New York, finding the part where the girl flogs the guy's doggy under a table at Windows on the World, practically artistic and uplifting. Certainly uplifted part of him, anyway. And to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, to Rainbow Bright and the Star Stealer. Oh, that one's good. And that's what I'm going to do now, he thought, rubbing his throat and thinking about the taste of good aged whiskey. Exactly what am I going to do? Just sit here and watch them all over again, even Rainbow Bright? And for lunch, I'm going to order 3 bacon cheeseburgers and eat one cold at 3 o'clock. Maybe skip Rainbow Bright and take a nap. Stay in tonight, go to bed early, stand it off. Bobbi Anderson tripped over a 3-inch tongue of metal protruding from the earth. Jim Gardner tripped over Ron Cummings. Different objects, same result. For want of a nail, Ron popped in around the same time that, some 210 miles away, Anderson and Peter were finally getting home from their less than normal trip to the vets. Cummings suggested they go down to the hotel bar and have a drink or 10. Or, Ron continued brightly, we could just skip the foreplay and get shit-faced. If he had put it more delicately, Guard might have been okay. That he found himself in the bar with Ron Cummings, raising a jolly Jack Daniels to his lips and telling himself the old one about how he could choke it off when he really wanted to. Ron Cummings was a good, serious poet, itch on my belly, who just wanted to have money practically falling out of his asshole. Or so he often told people. I want my own de Medici, he would say. I have money practically falling out of my asshole. His family had been in textiles for roughly 900 years and owned most of southern New Hampshire. They thought Ron was crazy, but because he was the second son and because the first one was not crazy, uninterested in textiles, they let Ron do what he wanted to do, which was write poems, read poems, and drink almost constantly. He was a narrow young man with a TB face. Gardner had never seen him eat anything but beer nuts and goldfish crackers. To his dubious credit, he had no idea Gardner's own problem with booze, or the fact that he had come very close to killing his wife while drunk. Okay, Gardner said, I'm up for it. Let's get faced. After a few in the hotel bar, Ron suggested that a couple of smart fellows like them could find a place with entertainment a tad more exciting than a piped-in muzak drifting down from the overhead speakers. I think my heart can take it, Ron said. I mean, I'm not sure, but God hates a crowd, Gardner finished. Ron cackled, slapped him on the back, and called for the tab. He signed it with a flourish and then added a generous tip from his money clip. Let's boogie, man. Let's boogie, my man. And off they went. The late afternoon sun lanced Gardner's eyes like glass spears, and it suddenly occurred to him that this might be a bad idea. Listen, Ron, he said. I think maybe I'll just. Cummings clapped him on the shoulder. Formerly pale cheeks flushed, formerly watery blue eyes blazing. The guard, Cummings, now looked rather like Toad of Toad Hall after the acquisition of his motor car, and cajoled. Don't crap out on me now, Jim. Boston lies before us, so various and new, glistening like the fresh ejaculate of a young boy's first wet dream. Um, Gardner burst into helpless gales of laughter. Yeah, I'd like to laugh, but that's not what I wanted to hear. That's more like the Gardner we've all come to know and love, Ron said, cackling himself. God hates a coward. Guard said. Hail us a cab, Ronnie. He saw it then, the funnel in the sky, big and black and getting closer. Soon it was going to touch down and carry him away. Thank you. That is very sweet of you. Not to Oz, though. The cab pulled over to the curb. They got in. The driver asked them where they wanted to go. Oz, Gardner muttered. Ron cackled. What he means is some place where they drink fast and dance faster. Think you can manage that? Oh, I think so, the driver said and pulled out. Gardner draped an arm around Ron's shoulders and cried, Let the wind rumpus start. I'll drink to that, Ron said. Yeah, we got time. Part 2. Gardner awoke the next morning fully dressed in a tub full of cold water, his best set of clothes, which hadn't had the misfortune of to be worn when he and Ron Cummings set sail the day before, were bonding themselves slowly to his skin. He looked at his fingers and saw they were very white and very pruny. Fish fingers. He'd been here for a while, apparently. The water might even have been hot when he climbed in. He didn't remember. He opened the tub drain and Saw a bottle of bourbon standing on the toilet seat. It was half full, its surface bleary with some sort of grease. He picked it up. The grease smelled vaguely of fried chicken. Gardner was more interested in the aroma coming from inside the bottle. Don't do this, he thought, but the neck of the bottle was rapping against his teeth before the thought was even half finished. He had a drink and blacked out again. When he came to, he was standing naked in his bedroom with the phone to his ear and a vague idea that he had just finished dialing a number. Whose? He had no idea until Cummings answered. Cummings sounded even worse than Gardner felt. Gardner would have sworn this was impossible. How bad was it? Gardner heard himself ask. It was always this way when he was in the cyclone. In the grip of the cyclone. Even when he was conscious, everything seemed to have the gray, grainy texture of tabloid photograph, and he never seemed to exactly be inside of himself. A lot of the time, he seemed much troubled to be floating above his own head, like a kid's silvery puffer balloon. How much trouble did we get into? I must have a hair on my nose. Trouble, Cummings repeated, and then fell silent. At least Gardner thought he was thinking, hoped he was thinking, or maybe dreaded the idea. He waited, his hands very cold. No trouble, Cummings said at last, and Gard relaxed a little. Except for my head, that is. I got my head in plenty of trouble. Jesus. You sure? Nothing at all? He was thinking of Nora. Shot your wife, huh? A voice spoke up suddenly in his head. A voice of the deputy with the comic book. Good fucking deal. Well, Cummings said reflectively and then stopped. Gardner's hand clutched tight to the phone again. Well, what? Suddenly the lights in the room were too bright. Like the sun when they had stepped out of the hotel late yesterday afternoon. You did something. You had another fucking blackout and did something stupid. Or a crazy thing. Or a horrible thing. When are you going to learn to leave it alone? Or can you learn? In exchange from an old movie clanged stupidly in his mind. Evil El Comandante. Tomorrow before daybreak, Signor, you will be dead. You have seen the sun for the last time. Brave Americano. Yeah, but you'll be bald for the rest of your life. What is it? He asked Ron. What did I do? You got into an argument with some guys at the place called the Stone Country Bar and Grill, Tommy said. He laughed a little. Oh, Christ, what it hurts to laugh. You know you abused yourself. You remember that Stone Country Bar and Grill and them there good old boys, James, my dear? He said he didn't, really straining. He could remember a place called Smith Brothers. The sun had just been going down in a kettle of blood. And this being late June, that meant it had been, 83, quarter of 9, or 8:30, quarter of 9. About 5 hours after he and Ron had gotten started, give or take. He could remember the sign outside, bore the likeness to the famous cough drop siblings. He could remember arguing furiously about Wallace Stevens with Cummings, shouting to be heard over the juke, which had been thundering out something by John Fogerty. That was where the last jagged edges of memory came to a halt. It was the place with the Waylon Jennings for President bumper sticker over the bar, Cummings said. That fresh old nigger. That refresh the old noggin? No, Gardner said miserably. Well, you got into an argument with a couple of good old boys. Words were passed. These words flew first warm and then hot. A punch was thrown. By me? Gardner's voice was now only dull. By you, Cummings agreed cheerfully. At which point we flew through the air with the greatest of ease, landing on the sidewalk. I thought we got off pretty cheap, to tell you the truth. You had them frothing, Jim. Was it about Seabrook, or Chernobyl? Shit, you do remember. If I remembered, I wouldn't be asking which one it was. As a matter of fact, it was both. Cummings hesitated. Are you all right, Guard? You sound real low. Yeah, well, actually, Ron, I'm way up. Oh, give me a second. Yes, babe. I have. Oh, I just have to finish this page, so I'll be done in like 3 minutes. Okay, sure. Yeah, sure, we can do that. Let me finish up and I'll get my shoes on. Oh God, I'll be done before you get to the house. Oh yeah. I can even let the dogs out and I can be back there with them when you walk in. I can grab my shoes and away we go. All right. I'll see you in a few. Okay, love you. All right, bye. We're going on a lunch date. We don't get to go out much, even though our kids are grown. We always stay. I stay home, and especially to watch over. I can't work, but I watch over my youngest son, and I don't let him be home alone too long by himself. So, but when everybody's gone, one's at work, at an appointment, one's with the DSP, we are going to go to lunch and have a good date. It's going to be nice. All right. Yeah, well, actually, Ron, I'm way up in the cyclone, going around and up and down, and where it ends, nobody knows. I'm okay. That's good. One hopes you know who you have to thank for it. You maybe? No other man. I landed on that sidewalk like a kid hitting the ground the first time he comes off the end of the slide. I can't quite see my ass in the mirror, but that's probably a good thing. I bet it looks like a Dayglow Grateful Dead poster from '69. But you wanted to go back in and talk about how all the kids around Chernobyl are going to be dead of leukemia in 5 years. You wanted to talk about how some guys almost blew up Arkansas looking for faulty wiring in a candle and with a candle in a nuclear power plant. You said they caught the place on fire. Me, I'd bet my watch, and it's a Rolex, that they were Snopes from Mieeppi. I'm gonna have to actually MED ME or Mieeppe or Pippi. I have no idea what that spells. I'm gonna have to write it out. I gotta figure this out because it's not letting my brain's not letting me figure it out. Mieee from MISS. I Mississippi. Mississippi. Mississippi? Why would they be from Mississippi? Only way I could get you into the cab was by telling you we'd come back later and bust heads. I sweet talked you up to your room and started the tub for you. You said you were all right. You said you were going to take a bath and then call some guy named Bobby. That guy's a girl, Gardner said absently. He was rubbing at his right temple with his free hand. Good looking? Pretty. No knockout. An errant thought, nonsensical but perfectly concrete. Bobby's in trouble. Ticked across his mind the way an errant billiard ball will roll across the clean green felt of a pool table. Then it was gone. And we're going to stop there because we're on part 3. So we'll start part 3 tomorrow. Or tonight, I mean. I will be here tonight. Don't worry. I will be here. So we're going to stop there. And you're welcome. Thank you for being here. It's so nice to have people here. It really is. Thank you for joining us. You are so welcome. I'm glad they're chill. I don't want it to be stressful or anything like that. So I'm glad they're chilled up for y'all. All right. We are going to go for now. I will see you guys soon. I love y'all. Y'all have a wonderful day. And I will see you again tonight at 7. Okay? All right. I'll see you later. Bye. Oh, what? Nice to meet you as well. I love Stephen King and I hope you have great. I absolutely love Stephen King and I want to try to read all his books before I move on to anything else, unless people decide they want something else. And then if I don't have it here, I can go to the library and get it. But I really like just sitting here and chilling. And as I'm reading things, my imaginations are going with what the scene might look like and what they're doing and all that stuff. So, yeah. As long as I have my voice, I'm going to keep on reading. Now, if I lose my voice, I'll have to take time off. And as I reminded people, I will be taking Friday night to, hey, hon, I'll be taking Friday night. So I'll be here Friday morning and I won't be back until Monday morning, taking the weekend off. I'm going to be with my grandkids this weekend. So here for, yes. Yeah. So thank y'all. Y'all are so awesome. You really are. I love it when people will talk. And I may not answer right away, but I will answer at some point. So that's the nice thing is that is so cute. I love those are awesome. I have to find me some emojis at some point. I should make up some emojis is what I should do. Hmm? I always go looking for these things. I have no idea. I'm gonna have to sit here sometime and just stare at them and see what they got. I don't have the regular emojis anymore. Oh, I got hearts. There we go. Ah, oop. I have little hearts. All right, I am going to let y'all go. Thank you all for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad all of you could be here. And I will see you all tonight at 7. So don't forget, we are going to start with chapter 5, part 4. So we did really good. Remember, there's only 10 chapters and we got an entire book to go. So the chapters are going to start getting longer. Okay? So I will see you guys this evening. And I'm going to go take my doggies out before I head out for lunch. So love y'all. I will see you soon. Bye.